Today I want to share with you how to make candied citron. And in this case, we're going to candy Buddha's hand citron. But this recipe is adaptable to any variety of citron, as well as any citrus peel. So you can make candied orange peel, candied lemon peel, or candied lime peel. But we're going to do it with citron. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, ferments, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Now generally, where I live here in the United States, I'll see citron in my supermarket in October or November, somewhere in that time frame. And that's perfect timing, so to speak, because this is wonderful to make to give as gifts or to use as an ingredient in making panettone, if you like to make homemade panettone, or for using to make in a fruit cake. Now citron comes in different varieties. This particular one is called Buddha's hand, and this is the one that was at my market. So that's what I decided to use, because citron can be a little hard to find sometimes. So I was happy that I saw it, and I was happy to take any variety. If you don't see Buddha's hand, you may see citron in another form that looks sort of like a lemon, but kind of like a knobbly, slightly larger lemon. Now the first thing that we're going to do is cut up this citron. And what's nice about working with citron is you don't have to peel this. We're going to cut this up and use all of these pieces as is. Now, if you want to turn this into something that would be nice to give as a little candy, as a gift, then you probably want to cut maybe 1/2-inch pieces. If you plan on using this in a recipe, for like a panettone or a fruit cake, as I mentioned earlier, you may want to cut about a 1/4-inch size. If you're adapting this recipe and are doing citrus peel, then obviously all you're going to want to use is the peel of the citrus fruit. We're just going to cut it right down the middle. Now I'm going to take a close-up picture and overlay it so you can see this up close, but when you slice it open, it's going to look white inside, and the aroma is heavenly. It is lemon times 10. There's really no exact science to cutting this up. I'm just going to start cutting it into pieces like this and then into 1/4 and 1/2-inch dices. Well, I've got my Buddha's hand all cut up here, and I've got about 4 cups. And Buddha's hand, you know, everyone is different, and so you may get about 3 cups once you cut it up, or you might get about 4 cups, but it doesn't matter. And don't worry if how you've cut up the pieces isn't perfect. It's an unusual fruit to be cutting up in the first place, but usually what I like to do is just get about, you know, as I said, a 1/4-inch or a 1/2-inch dice. The next thing we want to do is just take all of our cut pieces and transfer them to a good size saucepan here. And then once you get all of your citron into your saucepan, you just want to add enough water to cover. And I'll overlay a picture so you can see exactly how much water I've added. As I said, just to cover. And then what you'll want to do is just bring this up to a medium simmer. You don't want to boil this. And you want to keep your eye on it because we're going to simmer this for probably for about 40 minutes. What you're looking for is for the citron to cook and to soften in its texture. And this is a very good step to take because in addition to cooking it and creating a softer texture, it also helps to decrease some of the bitterness that can be in that white part of the citron. Some recipes will say you don't need to take the step, you can just go right into the candying step. But I think that would be a mistake. I think it's better to take the time to simmer it. It does add to the cook time, it adds to the recipe cook time. However, it makes a better final product. And as this simmers on medium, check it from time to time to make sure that the water hasn't dissipated. You want to make sure that there's always sufficient water that the citron is simmering in. And as I said, you're just looking about 40 minutes and you're looking for it to soften and be somewhat translucent in its appearance. Well, I simmered the citron for about 40 minutes. It's nice and soft now and somewhat translucent. I'll take a picture and I'll overlay it so that you can see what I'm talking about. And now what we're going to do is put this back into our pot, all nice and strained. And then we're going to add 3 cups of sugar. And you're going to need a little more sugar too later on, which I'll talk about when we get to that point. But right now we're going to go 3 cups of sugar and 2 cups of water. And what we're making is basically a simple syrup for candying citrus fruit, or citrus peels, I should say, and in this case, citron. And then I'm just going to give that a stir, and I'll take a picture and overlay it so that you can see. And then what we're going to do is basically you'll see it's about just to cover. And don't worry, it's not an exact science, especially when you're working with the Buddha's hand, because it's somewhat odd shapen. I had about 4 cups chopped. You may have 3 cups chopped. But start with this amount of simple syrup, because generally 3 cups of sugar and 2 cups of water is going to be enough to coat 3 to 4 cups of either citrus peel or, in this case, citron. And all we're going to do is now, whoops, let me move this to the side, is bring this up to a simmer. Get that going. Now, we need for this to come up to 230 degrees Fahrenheit. And I believe that's somewhere around 107, 108 degrees Celsius. And once it comes up to 230 degrees Fahrenheit, then we're going to remove it from the heat. Now, I have a candy thermometer to help me with this process. Now, don't worry if you don't have a thermometer. If you don't, what you're going to want to do is just watch this as it cooks. And when you see the syrup getting thick, and to the point where if you put a spoon in it and it sort of can make like a thread, because 230 degrees when you're making candy is considered the thread stage. So you don't, so that's basically what you're looking for, something that would just make a nice thread. So somewhat thick, but not overly thick. And I'll show you as we go through the process. But right now what I'm going to do is put my candy thermometer in here and get this up to 230 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, I got this up to 230 degrees, and I'll take a picture and overlay it so that you can see exactly what it looks like. But most of the sugar water syrup has evaporated considerably. So that's a good test for you to see in case you're not using a thermometer. And then also I'll show you, I'm just going to push some of the citron aside and pull out some of the syrup so that you can see the consistency. But see, it's very, very syrupy. And if you did the official thread test, as it's called, if you dropped some of this into very cold water, it would look very like thread-like. It might even make the appearance of a little bit of a spider web or something like that. But this is perfect. Now what we're going to do is we're going to let this sit in this syrup for about an hour so that the citron can really absorb it. Now I let the citron sit in this syrup for about an hour or so. Now at this point you have a couple of choices. You can scoop this just as it is and put it in a jar and store it right in its syrup like that. And it can be luscious. You can use this to top up maybe a plain cake with, or add it to a little yogurt for a real treat. It can be very, very tasty like that. But if you want to make it look like the candied citrus that you see that's dusted with the sugar, the next step that you want to do is take this and put it on a baking sheet. What I've done here is I've put down some parchment paper, and then I'm going to put this little cooling rack on top, which helps. If you don't, it's not essential. It does make it a little easier to do if you have a cooling rack, because it allows for some of the syrup to drip down through, because you want to get this a little drier before you dust it with the sugar. So I'm just going to keep spreading this out onto my cooling rack, and then we'll dust it with the sugar. So as you'll see, some of the syrup is dripping down onto the parchment paper. You may not get a lot. If you had 3 cups of citron when you started versus the 4 cups that I had, you may have a little more syrup than what I'm getting. But whatever the case may be, if you want, you can take a little spoon and scoop that syrup off the parchment paper and save it, and you can put a little bit in with seltzer water and make kind of like a homemade soda. You can add it like you could with the citron to yogurt to sweeten it up. I don't drink, but I've heard from people who like to make cocktails that they'll add a little of the citron syrup to a cocktail, and it's very nice. Now, once you notice that no more syrup is basically going to drip off of these, this is the time you get ready to dust them with the sugar. And really, all you're going to do is just take some sugar and sprinkle it on and mix it around a bit, and then you're going to leave it overnight to cure. So you're just going to leave it on your drying rack, or if you weren't able to drain it, if you didn't have a drying rack and you just had it on the parchment paper, you'll do the same thing. You'll just go ahead and, you know, there's not a lot of syrup, so don't worry if you didn't have the drying rack. And you're just going to go ahead and you're going to sprinkle this sugar, and then we'll toss them all around, and then we'll leave them to dry overnight. Now, keep in mind, a lot of sugar is going to fall through the cracks. You know, it'll bounce off of the citron and fall through the cracks. The rest will stick, but some during the curing process over the next 24 hours or so may also drip down. And if you've not removed the syrup, it'll kind of be mixed with the syrup and whatnot. Don't throw any of that out. That sugar is going to have a wonderful flavor to it, and you can use it in baking things where you might like a citrusy flavor. Well, this looks wonderful. I'll overlay a picture so you can see it up close. Now, what you want to do is leave this overnight, maybe even 24 hours, and you'll notice that some of the sugar will look like it's been absorbed or dissolved, and some of it will still remain, and it'll become much more easy to handle. It'll dry out a little. I'm going to surprise my son with this when he comes home for Christmas, because when he was a little boy, he always enjoyed picking the citron out of the Panettone. We were just talking on the phone about that and reminiscing about it. But now he'll have a whole bunch of citron that he can just eat right out of the container. And I just want to show you, as the pieces start to absorb the sugar, they also start to separate. And I'll take a picture so that you can see this up close. But that's basically what they're going to look like as they dry, as they kind of cure, so to speak, as they dry out overnight and absorb some more of the sugar. And this is definitely a sweet treat. And then there'll be also some sugar on the outside. But that looks so tasty. They're not technically 100% ready, but I'll give it a taste. Mmm, so citrusy. I love it. Well, it's the next morning, and it's been about 12 hours that this citron has been drying out. Sometimes it can take 24 hours. It really depends. But what you're going to look for the next day is that the citron, while it's sitting on your rack, over your baking sheet, on your parchment paper, or directly on your parchment paper, what you're looking for is that it will have absorbed a lot of the sugar. It'll still be a little tacky, and a lot of the sugar will have dissolved, and it'll just be either sitting on your rack or on your parchment paper on your baking sheet. And then what you're going to want to do is take your baking rack, if you're using one, and then just very carefully, it's not perfect science, try to dump it onto your parchment-lined baking sheet that has all of the little syrup that may have dripped off and the extra sugar that may have fallen onto the parchment paper. Now, if you just started with it on the parchment paper, you don't need to worry about this step. And then what you'll want to do is just try to brush off as much as you can. If there are some pieces that are sticking or little bits of sugar, whatever the case may be, try to brush off your baking rack as well as you can, your drying rack as well as you can. Then, what your citron is basically going to look like now that it's dumped down onto the parchment-lined baking sheet with all of the extra sugar, I'll overlay a picture. It's pretty much going to just look like this. And it may still be a little sticky to the touch, but that's fine. That's exactly what you want. And then you're going to take, with clean hands, you're going to take your hands and just do like this. You're just going to want to toss it again in any of that extra sugar that is on your parchment paper, or has, that fell through the cracks if you were using the drying rack, or is just there on your parchment paper along with your citron that you may have put directly onto this parchment paper right from the beginning. And then I'm going to take some close-up shots and I'll overlay them. Once you're done tossing it with the sugar, all of the pieces should look very well covered, and the sugar will be sticking to them. It's not going to absorb it at this point. It's just going to be sticking to the exterior. And if you took a piece between your fingers, it won't be sticky. None of the sugar will be coming off, and it shouldn't feel sticky to the touch. And if you tried to squeeze it between your fingers, it would still be soft, so that if you ate this as a candy, it would still be it's still going to be very flavorful, and it's going to be soft, so like a jelly bean. And at this point, you're ready to just start putting it into a nice little candy dish to serve at maybe your dessert buffet during the holidays, or you can put this in a box and give it as a gift. It's very shelf stable at this point. It'll stay kind of soft and nice for about a week. And then after that point, you may want to keep it in the refrigerator. But you just put in a nice little candy dish like this. I'll overlay a picture so you can see when I will really fill it up. How nice it can look mounded, on a dessert table. Then, after you're all done, and you get all your citron into a candy dish or whatever, or a box, whatever you're doing with it, you're going to be left with this sugar. And it will have taken on a little bit of a beige color to it. And I'll take a picture and I'll overlay it so that you can see what the color looks like. You can see it up close. Now, you don't want to discard this sugar. It's going to have a wonderful flavor of the citron, which is a beautiful citrus flavor. You can save this and add this to tea. You can add this maybe when you're making a holiday cocktail. Any place where you might use sugar. You can also use it in baking if you want to give something a lovely citrus flavor. Maybe if you're making like a lemon pound cake or something like that. This will add a magnificent level of flavor. Well, I hope you'll give making candied citron a try. It's really very delicious. And if you'd like to learn more about traditional cooking, be sure to subscribe to my channel and then click on this video over here where I show you how to make homemade evaporated milk. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.